Welcome everyone to Los Libertinos podcast. I am your host, Carlos Abelard, and this is Chingazos and Fire episode number 60. Our guest today is Oliver Bateman. He is a journalist, lawyer, historian, marketing professional, and a strength athlete. Previously, he was an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Texas, teaching courses on critical theory, transnational legal history, American constitutional history, appellate advocacy, and cultural history. He recently did a series at Renegade University on the history of law in the U.S., colonies to the Civil War. He has a kind of new Substack called Oliver Bateman Does the Work. Welcome, Oliver.
Hey, Carlos, how you doing?
Pretty good, man. In we interacted first at the Renegade class, and that was a lot of fun. And when I reached out to you to do an interview, I in my brain I was like, well, I just did a bunch of classes with you, and I should have done some notes, but I didn't. But it was still fascinating, and I reached out to you,
Yeah.
and then in reaching out to you, then I learned more about you, and you're pretty fascinating vato, man. So then it made I kind of got hyped up. So yeah, for anybody that doesn't know who you are or anything like that, I always try to say that in my show, it's like half political people and half like my primos and tios and tias and all that. So yeah, feel free to kind of give a background, born, raised. Feel free to freestyle a long version of it, man, because you have an interesting background for sure.
Well, anybody listening to this should definitely, when the second half of the Renegade legal history course drops, um, they should definitely consider if they want to, they should consider enrolling in it because you were in the first one, and there's some of those lectures, especially toward the end. I love teaching that class over the years, and it's just straight fire, toward the end. It's great stuff. The second half is going to be even better as we go from the Civil War up to, I'm going to take it all the way up to Dobbs last year. So this will be a big course. So anybody listening who wants to give that a go, Carlos was in it. He can vouch for it. Fun stuff.
Yeah, I'll put a
The
link.
Renegade
I'll put a link.
University.
I'll put a link in the show notes. So yeah, everybody for sure tune in or get it, enroll in the
Yeah.
first one. You can still check it out.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just a great course. And what was really cool about it and what's going to be cool about the second one is you can really see, I mean, it's not just America, it's every country in the world, every big Western country. You could just see how government has grown over the existence. Like we talk about, like, oh, that was a really powerful leader like 500 years ago. Oh, that was an absolute king like 500 years ago. No, I mean, the government, the growth of the government, the growth of the state, the growth of the legal system. I mean, what we've got today is unlike anything that ever came before. And I really try to hammer that home. I mean, we are living in a time of more government than ever before. I mean, for good and bad. And it's really interesting to learn how that came to pass. So I just love teaching that. So if anybody is listening to it here who wanted to do the course, they should go and do it. But yeah, as for my background, I'm from Western Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, and I grew up there. I grew up on a farm actually, and I have kind of bounced around. I lived with my uncle when I was in high school because my parents got divorced, so I went to live with him. So I went to high school in Raleigh, North Carolina, and then I went to college in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at the University of North Carolina. And then I went to Valparaiso, Indiana for law school. I went to the University of Pittsburgh again to get my PhD. So hometown, that was great. I taught at the University of Texas at Arlington for 4 years. Um, and then since then, I have worked in marketing for big companies and now like a mid-sized company while writing about everything under the sun, at legal history, cultural history, all that sort of stuff, strength, sports history. I guess, like for me, the thing that ties it all together is I have always enjoyed doing all these different things. And I like being able to sell all of them in different areas. Like my dad was a businessman, so I'm, in business for trying to make people aware of all the stuff I'm teaching, whether it's writing or lecturing or just pushing stuff out, even in my day job and making them aware of what my company is working on. I love that's kind of the thread that ties it all together. And if you go to oliverbateman.com, you will just see tons and tons, and as you saw there, like 1,000+ published articles in the past 10 years, and it's across this whole spectrum of things. And I love doing it, man. Like that's my life. And my wife thinks it's kind of crazy, because I've always got something, after the little one goes to bed, I've always got something else I'm working on. But if I didn't have that, I would be really bored. Everybody's got hobbies. So I go down the basement. That's where I am right now. And I do my thing.
Perfect, man. Perfect. Yeah. And so like I mentioned, man, I was gonna interview in my original mindset was to kind of go over the course and
Yeah.
then kind of getting into some of your and I know in the first course, it was like the introduction, you had mentioned that that you write we had talked a little bit about wrestling there, and real easily,
Yes. Yes. I mean,
all the
the
vatos.
Mexican angle there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 All
Yeah.
all the vatos real quick started going. It it brings up wrestling. Everybody, da, 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 da. But and then we were like, oh shit, hey, it's actually gonna learn. It's class time. But so then I remembered that, and then it kind of just watching some other podcast interviews that you were on and all that. I didn't realize to the extent of that you really get into it because of your writings and a little bit of that. But yeah, just a quick on me, just so you know, like yeah, I didn't grow like I didn't have cable, so I just watched what I don't even remember. Like it's cool, man. Like even preparing for this interview, I started thinking like my whole past of wrestling stuff, just so you kind of know a little bit, so that way you can
Yeah.
intertwine some of
Yeah.
the stuff. And like I didn't have cable, so I remember as a kid when everybody would start talking about Raw,
What
like
city were you growing up in? Where
San
were you
Antonio.
growing up in San Antonio?
San
Okay.
Antonio. So I remember like as a kid when people were talking about Raw, I would kind of fade away because I didn't have cable, and it kind of like, oh, so but I did know what was going on. And then I remember like in seventh or eighth grade or early high school, we got a hot box, right? So then you really had all the channels, right? So then so I didn't really watch all of every single episode of all that stuff, but I knew enough to watch like the pay-per-views and have the friends
Mhm.
over because I had the hot box and on the street, and it was cool. Everybody came over, and but during that whole time, I also would go to Mexico, Nuevo Laredo, because that's where my family is from, my mom's side. And every time we would go, it was automatic, lucha libre, live events, lucha libres, and Sundays was like to watch like on Spanish station, like Triple A was that brand, the triple,
Yep. Yep.
so
Yeah.
that was kind of my upbringing. And then in high school, it was like the Stone Cold era and Generation X and Shawn Mike. It was that was kind of what I got into, and then I kind of faded away from it as I started like consistently getting laid. After high school, I started getting okay on that game side, and then you just kind of fade away. But the one thing that I do remember that was kind of like which is why also and I'll explain it right now when I reached out to you a little bit too about asking you about Kayfabe, was that I do remember as a kid when my parents told me it's not real, don't worry about it, because I got emotional because I remember, I don't know who Undertaker put in this casket, but I remember he put somebody in the casket, and it was like with that vato with the urn and all that shit. I don't remember, but I was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
remember I was kind of, I remember I was very emotional, and I told my parents are like, it's not real. But up to that point, I felt it was kind of. I mean, I don't know what I was feeling, but I remember and then my parents just, it's not real, it's not real. Don't worry about it. And then after that, I just remember that I just started enjoying it in a different way before I realized that guy in the casket was not going to suffocate, and then after that, that's kind of my little short history of, so that way kind of what I won't know promotions out of the Northwest or this or that,
Yeah.
but
But you were watching Triple A, which was the like gold standard. A lot of wrestling fans would say that either CMLL or like Triple A were the gold standards in wrestling in ring from probably like 93 to like 2010. Even today, some like the best acrobatics are in those two federations and some of the other Mexican indies. Those guys are crazy. Like, I mean, between like if you want blood matches, they do great blood matches, and if you want acrobatic matches, They do great, the Technicos and the Rudos do great, great, great athletic acrobatic matches. It's great shit, man. Like I love that style of wrestling, and you were getting to see it.
Oh,
And
oh yeah.
both of those federations are still doing pretty good business, actually. Like that, they have a lot of sponsors. I mean, sometimes I guess the behind the scenes stuff can be a little shady, but the money is coming in. So Mexican wrestling does pretty well.
Yeah, I haven't seen a like I just don't watch it anymore. But I remember as a kid,
Oh, it's as good as it's ever been, strangely enough. It's really, really good. Like my buddy Phil, who writes for The Ringer with me, is a huge fan of AAA. And like there's always something they've got. I mean, they've got everybody's kids now. Like every luchador has all these juniors and like the thirds, and they're all coming up. So they all cycle through and they're all good.
yeah, they
Like
even
it's
have
like,
like the little
family
people.
businesses.
Even the little people are that wear the mask like that. I remember those were
Yeah.
always the fun ones
Yeah.
too, man. To watch.
They still do that. They
Yeah,
have the little versions of the different.
yes.
That's great.
So I bring all that up to kind of just let you know what's up with me, but for sure, tell us how you got into like wrestling and all that to be able to be like writing about it and all that. I mean, that has to be, yeah, freestyle the lucha libre freestyle your history on some of that, man, because man, that has to be interesting.
My dad, I basically got into it because my dad and brother watched it. From the Pittsburgh area, it was always the big federation was always the WWF because that was the regional federation, and like there was some of the great stars of the '60s and '70s WWF were from the Pittsburgh area, and my dad, almost as early as I can remember watching it, earliest thing I remember watching is like WrestleMania 2 with Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy. And from the beginning, I never had see that Undertaker story. I was on this Nigerian guy's podcast, and he was living in Nigeria. He told me the same thing about the Undertaker. He was like, I was actually scared of the Undertaker. And some of my friends who were he was like 6 or 7, were also afraid of the Undertaker. So that obviously worked, I guess. Kids were scared of people getting nailed in coffins and stuff like that. But for me, almost as early as I can remember, my dad, was owned the car dealership, was a salesman, and would say, watch these dudes, like these guys are selling you. This whole thing is fake. Watch how they're actors. Watch how they're doing this. They're good salesmen. Watch what's going on here. Because to him, and he's right, like pro wrestling is just what was amateur wrestling in the early 1900s, end of the 1800s, with sales and marketing added to it and fake finishes. Like they're making something dramatic. They're trying to trick you to come in and pay for. Basically, there's a long tradition in America. I mean, we're the best country at sales and marketing. There's no other better country at sales and marketing. That's the American contribution. Some people say it's the inventions like the iPhone and, all these different things. It's the marketing. A lot of the things that have been invented or refined here, nobody would have bought but for the marketing, and pro wrestling is one of the ultimate marketing mediums. And it has so many things going on around it too, because just like a lot of marketing, it's this weird combination of truth, false, all these different things built into it. I mean, the performance is real. The guys are real athletes. The acting skills are real. The outcomes are fake. But that's like a whole lot of other advertising, like, telling you that you'll wear this shirt and you'll be cool like this guy, or, drink this protein shake and you'll be big like Rob Gronkowski or something like that. It's not going to happen. But that's what but, as a kid, that was the first thing where, something my dad and I had in common where, he'd sit down after work at night, or it'd be on Saturday morning, and I'd be watching it. And when we had conversations about it, it wouldn't be about like, oh, that's cool or that's not cool. It'd be like, listen to this guy talk. He's really good. Or look at this guy move in the ring. Like you're really like into that. You know why? And he was always trying to make me think about why people were buying and selling what they were buying and selling. And so that's what drew me into pro wrestling. And all the years I watched it, I was always watching for the performance, like to see, is he a good talker? Is this guy got a good body? Is this guy, able to work? Can this guy do impressive stuff? And I was, interested as I learned more and more about it, and in my teen years, I got into like writing wrestling fan fiction and tape trading wrestling. tapes from different parts of the world. So I learned about Mexican wrestling a little bit, and I learned about Japanese
Tape
wrestling. This was the
tape
late
trading.
'90s when this stuff.
Tape trading. So you
Yes,
would
we would
I never heard
send
of that.
VHS tape. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
VHS tapes would be sold back and forth, and I wasn't even one of the big time tape traders. But when I got money or when I could send away for something, I would. And so I was kind of digging into the history even then, and I was interested in how all these different areas and people were doing it. And for me, it was never like just as a fan. Like I kind of knew that I wanted to do. I don't know why. I was like, I kind of knew that I wanted to do something with it. And even though I wrestled in high school, I never like thought like wrestling would be. I would never want to be a pro wrestler. I knew that that meant you were going to fall down, right? Like you're going to fall on your back over and over and over again. And I'm not going to do that. But I did think, and my dad would say this about all my hobbies, like, weight training or other things I was doing. Think about how you can sell this to people. Don't think about doing this as a sport. Because my dad had played college football at West Virginia University. His whole thing was like, I didn't, this didn't do anything for me. I got to do, I got an education, but I didn't get anything out of it. And so I was always thinking, man, what can I do with this? Like, what can I tell people about this? Or what can I do with this that isn't just it? Like, it's helpful that I know how it's done, and it's helpful that I can do it to an extent. But what do I want to say about it? And so I was always kind of in that role of wanting to, and it helped that until I went to high school in my junior year, I was homeschooled. So I was homeschooled up until grade 11. So I was just me, often sometimes at home during the day watching pro wrestling while my parents worked. So there's nobody homeschooling. I was just there a lot of like later on, like after, the early grades were out of the way, I was just in the house reading books, watching wrestling. And my dad or mom would come home and then ask me what I read or watched that day. And I talked to them about this stuff. And so I didn't know any better. I didn't know what I was going to do with this, but I was just like, I'm learning what this is. And I want to be able to tell people about it somehow. And that's how I ended up as these writing opportunities would open up. I worked on the school paper, and I met a lot of people who went into media. And so when writing opportunities would come up, I had kind of connections. So people would ask me to write this or write that while I was in grad school and then after. And I just began writing about these topics. And when you were writing about pro wrestling in like 2008 or 2009, 2010, it wasn't really getting covered everywhere. Like it wasn't really getting covered in serious places like the Atlantic, or the New York Times. Like they might cover it once in a while and, somebody killed somebody or something crazy happened, but they weren't like covering it like a real thing to comment on. They might comment on some scandal, or maybe, it's getting good ratings or something, but they weren't commenting on it. And I was really lucky with the wrestling writing that I was sort of a pen pal of this guy, David Shoemaker, who was at Grantland, which some people might remember Grantland as like the literary site of ESPN. Like ESPN had like a magazine, and it was called Grantland. And David was writing for Grantland at that time and writing about wrestling. And he was probably one of the first people to write about wrestling that wasn't news and it wasn't gossip. And it was just like commentary on wrestling and analysis of wrestling and historical pieces for a general audience on wrestling. And when he got to be an editor at this group called The Ringer, they brought me on to write a lot of historical pieces. So I've done a whole bunch. I'm actually doing one right now on Sting and the Great Muta. For the Great Muta is this famous Japanese wrestler for his retirement match on the 22nd. So I'm doing a long piece with a friend of mine. We're co-authoring it about the 5 or 6 matches that Muta and this guy Sting, who you might remember, had over their career that were so important, even though there's so few of them. So we're writing about that. So I've been lucky to write about wrestling there and other places just because, editors have gotten to see my work and they've gotten to know it. But I've also been ready to write about these topics for the general audience. Like I've always thought about how to do it. And that was always what I wanted to do on the side. So, because, like, I don't know, it's kind of a rule of thumb. My dad's thing about hobbies was like, it's great if you have hobbies, but can they make you any money? Because he's always wheeling and dealing and like always hustling. He was the type of guy who'd walk in a restaurant and say, like, what can I have for free? What do I have to do to get it? And usually they'd say, no, or then he'd go back and forth with them, or I'm not paying this for that. Uh, and so everything like that, it's informed my whole approach to writing and to the work. I've really figured out how to monetize and sell within all these different areas. And that's actually part of what my Substack is about. If people subscribe to it, I talk about on there, and I gave you a complimentary lifetime subscription, so you'll get to see all the videos. But I talk on the videos about the how I do the work I do. Like I talk about like how each week I kind of do the, what did I sell? What am I working on right now? How's the business go? What am I looking to do? And I don't know too many writers that just sit back and like every 2 weeks or so, like we'll put together. I do a bunch of other things on there, but like every 2 weeks or so, put together a video on what did I write? Why did I write it? What am I working on? How much did I make? I talk about those things just because it's business. To me, it's business. I don't think a lot of writers approach it that way. And when I was a college professor, that was the one thing that held me back. Like if you're a state of Texas employee, right? Like you make a salary and it's public. Like in Texas, you can go and search all these public official salaries. So I'd go there and like search my salary, it'd be like $63,000. And then I'd find like police sergeant on the campus, and it'd be like $118,000. I mean, what the hell? Like, because that's where my mind goes. I was like, I'm doing these great lectures week to week. A lot of them are, especially in the legal history class. I'm up there, and the kids are really liking it, and I put a lot into the performance. I was really just I love doing a performance. Like you saw, like with the class at Renegade, like I just get more and more into it as the semester goes on, and it's all sort of connecting. And I was like, man, I'm getting like one flat fee to do this, and these other yokels are making more than me. And well, my wife was also at the University of Texas at Arlington working there. Like we've both been given jobs there. And when she got a job at Carnegie Mellon back here in Pittsburgh in 2016, it paid enough that I could quit my job and then just figure out a route into the private sector. So then I wound up doing marketing for a big company called CBRE at the entry level, but that I wasn't there for long. Like I wanted to write, research reports and big papers and get paid for my performance. And I hadn't, like as I was getting my PhD and stuff, I hadn't ever really thought about that, like how much I was sort of a creature of the private sector and sales and marketing and everything like that. And how much, growing up in a small business had really shaped me, because my mom was a school teacher, public school teacher, but my dad, was sort of the one that I was always interested in because he always had some kind of thing going on, some kind of scheme or scam or something. And I just found that really interesting. And like, that's a situation where what you can make is what you're getting, you're not held back by all these different rules. So I lucked into in 2017 when I went to work for CBRE. It was a fully remote job. This is before COVID and everything like that. So it was a fully remote. They went remote kind of early, and I was able to just start piling on freelance on top of everything else. So I was able to do all kinds of different things. For a couple of years, I had a podcast that did really well, and it was all fun because I was making money from it. But I was also doing the stuff that I went to school for so many years to do. Like when I can go and do legal history, right? Like it pulls it all together and it makes the PhD worth it. And I hadn't taught legal history since 2016. So when I did that course at Renegade, I was like, man, gotta do that again, And yeah, it's just tons of fun. So that's been my approach to this over the years. Is I'm a businessman. Like that's what I'm doing.
No, yeah, no. It actually, like the way you say it right now, like I am a business man.
Yeah, yeah.
And
as Jay-Z would say.
Yeah, and no, man, yeah, exactly. So like it's very fascinating. And then when I had reached out to you just to kind of give you like a topic because it's something that I'm kind of into was that I had kind of mentioned to you. I was like, hey, you know a lot of the wrestling, and obviously you're passing tapes and stuff like that. And I had asked you, hey, can I ask you about Eric Weinstein's Kayfabe take? and and so that was a take that um I heard when he got interviewed on the Rogan on Joe Rogan's episode, and I had never even heard of the idea of kayfabe and all. I just knew, okay, wrestling's fake, just like without putting more thought to it. And then
Yeah,
obviously I
like
knew that when Jesse Ventura won, there was something weird that happened when he won. I remember, because most of my political upbringing, as a kid was mostly like, oh, you vote Democrat because they're for the poor and Republicans are for the rich. I mean, that was
yeah.
really it. But I did start watching like Bill Maher, so that was like my thing, like Bill Maher every week, and so that was my
Oh,
intro.
yeah.
So if I ever saw Jesse Ventura on there or something, I was always fascinated because I was like, hey, that was like a wrestler, vato, and he made it. Then I just remember one time he said something like, oh, after I won, maybe in an interview, like, oh, I won, and I got taken down to the bottom of some basement, and there was a bunch of people around that were all the suits and said, hey, do you know what you did? Or hey, that you really, it was, and I don't think he's lying. I mean, I guess he could be lying, who knows? But I just remember just
Mm.
that stuck with me in my mind. And then so when I heard Eric Weinstein's Kayfabe and how he kind of thought that having the idea or the concept of Kayfabe and applying it to like modern institutions of like media and political or different, and then you being in media but with your writings and all that, I wanted to get your take on that because I tried to, once I heard it, that framework really just man, it really just made sense to me. But I know that nothing's ever just the way somebody frames it. There's always a lot of angles to different things. But in my view, the way that I was raised or whatever, the kayfabe framework that Eric put out just makes sense to me. But I don't know, man. So I guess my question is kind of like for anybody that like for anybody that doesn't know what kayfabe is in wrestling terms, kind of get into that, and then whether you kind of have any opinion on whether Eric Weinstein's take of kayfabe has any merits to it.
Yeah, yeah. So kayfabe is from the Carney language that the wrestlers used to speak. They would do this kind of pig Latin sounding thing with words. Like Carney would be Kizarni and things like that, so that like outside listeners who heard it wouldn't know what they were saying if they overheard them like coming out, out of the backstage or walking around or whatever. They had a whole bunch of words that involved like the business of wrestling. And kayfabe was one of those words, just sort of meaning fake, but it doesn't really mean fake. Where wrestling is interesting, and I actually have a long essay that was in Pacific Standard on this. Wrestling is interesting in that it really centers kayfabe, and it's where the word is from, obviously. And the point of wrestling is to present what is fake as what is real. It depends on ensuring audience suspension of disbelief. Like, and that's also the other part of it. The audience also has to sort of be even in 1940 or 1950, 1930. The business keeps getting exposed. It's exposed in the 30s. It's exposed in the 50s. People are saying this is fake. And like the stories will come out, and everybody, like my dad knew in the 60s wrestling was fake. When he was watching it in the 50s as a kid, and at the same time, you go there. I mean, some people are just going to believe it is what it is, but there are going to be also a whole bunch of fans there who kind of know that it's fake, but they also want to go along with it and think like, well, Jesse Ventura's in the ring. He's a real tough guy. I mean, this might be fake, but he's not fake. These types of things. And there's so many levels of suspension of disbelief and fakery and so on going on there. And that's kind of how that sport stayed in business into the 80s. And eventually 89, 88, Vince McMahon admits before athletic commissions, because he wanted to stop paying athletic commission taxes, that this is fake. These are just exhibitions. You don't need to test our guys anymore. We don't want to pay you $10,000 a year. So, a smart move, in my opinion, business wise. But he basically tells the whole world finally that the business is completely fake, which everybody's known for ages.
Oh, but he had to do it for legal reasons, or
Yeah,
to
absolutely. And it's the right move. You probably saved like $250,000 a year after doing that. So, I mean, $89, that's a lot of money. So, I mean, he's a good businessman for all his other issues that Vince McMahon has, but he was a good businessman. But that idea that, you have this one presentation that's presented as real, but it is fake. And then the audience is sort of a combination of in on it and not. Like some people are really in on it and they're cheering. That's got a longer heritage than just wrestling. Wrestling adopts it and perfects it. But the whole history of America, I say this as an American historian who was sort of trained in cultural history and trained in basically things like the history of American advertising and marketing and things like that. The whole history of America and like the way that it's important to remember. And if I do just an American history class or history of advertising class for Renegade, I'll talk about this. But it's important to remember that America had to be settled. There weren't large chunks of this country didn't have people here it had people here, but they weren't people who were subjects of the British Crown or subjects of the colonies. You had to get those people over here. And after the Revolutionary War, you had to continue to get these people over. You had to continue to populate this country. And you had to also, as we talked about in the legal history class, you had to come up with a whole bunch of founding ideas that were going to hold together all these states and all these people who believed completely different things. And so America is founded on a kind of kayfabe. All men are created equal. All men are entitled to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And these are like founding myths of we the people of the country. And nobody believes them except everybody believes them. And this is the entire challenge of American history. America's born in freedom with a quarter of the population enslaved in the southern states. Edmund Morgan writes about that in American Slavery, American Freedom. They're intertwined. Can't have American freedom without American slavery. And the American dream, like the comedian George Carlin has a joke about it. George Carlin, you might have heard this one, says, the American dream, this idea that you can come here and make it and be successful, which can be true. I mean, it was certainly true for my mom's parents, but you can come here and make it. But Carlin says at the end of the day, you got to be, they call it the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. And, because for so many people, it's not the reality. They're poor. They have no upward mobility. They have no chance. They have no opportunities and so on. But at the same time, that idea is so powerful. And it's something that politicians on the left and the right, if they're giving speeches, will all pay lip service to. I mean, every speech that's ever been given in this country since 1800 in a president, preparing for a presidential election or something in a newspaper circulating, it's all kayfabe. They're laying it out as they want you to think it is. It's not as it is. They want it as they want it to be. And so this idea of kayfabe is so powerful because America as a new republic, as a country that's created out of nothing, it doesn't have a real history. It wasn't reconquered bit by bit like Spain. It hasn't been one thing since England, since 1066. It wasn't one shared language group like the German states as they finally unified into Germany. It's not one thing. It doesn't have any of those things. It has these myths and these fake myths that aren't even thousands of years old. It has these myths that were made up a couple of generations ago, that all these politicians get on TV and all of these people that want you to participate in the country and pay your tax dollars and don't ask about the UFOs and don't ask about this. And as Jesse Ventura would say, and don't ask about 9/11 and don't ask about these other things, all these things that they say. And then behind the scenes, a whole nother thing goes on. And just like wrestlers backstage or salesmen backstage, because it's long before wrestling, salesmen in department stores were sitting around mocking the people they were trying to sell to. What a sucker. What a mark. The con game in the United States is older than pro wrestling. The different types of con game, 3-card Monte and these sorts of things, a Faro game originate in the 1850s and 1860s. Horse races, baseball games, all these things were fixed in the 1860s, 1870s. I mean, almost as soon as you could bet in the United States, things were faked, fixed, the 19th century term is hippodrome, because horses would run in what was called a hippodrome. So they'd call any kind of fixed fight or fixed horse race a hippodrome. All this stuff. So the whole American experience, the whole American, like, this is both our weakness and our strength. We have this enduring kayfabe that was born on July 4th, 1776. And it has carried us to 2022 as the world's leading superpower. And so much of it, when will completely upset you if you dig too far behind the curtain. It doesn't bother me, because I mean it's my job. Like, I'm a historian. Like this, making people, getting rid of people's illusions, but also at the same time letting them know that's just life. That's part of my job. But no, it's an amazing thing, the origins of this, origins of this country, and the fact that, like, pro wrestling raised to the highest art. There's no doubt. Like, there's no reason. Like, the countries where pro wrestling is the greatest: the United States, Mexico, Japan. In Japan, it comes over directly from the United States in the wake of World War II, and it's adapted. In Mexico, it also flows south. So it's all flowing from that America. And those are all countries that are significantly influenced by the U.S. And they all have the best pro wrestling. Europe pro wrestling. England had good wrestling, but again, it pales in comparison to what we're doing here on this continent. There's no doubt. That's why our wrestling is the best. And it's the same reason our sales and marketing is the best. Our country has the best BS, quite honestly. We're the best at it.
I've never heard it put in that way, that which enduring kayfabe, right? Like, yeah. It's just in our DNA. And but
Jerry Seinfeld had an amazing 4-minute bit where he's getting an advertising award, because Jerry Seinfeld, after Seinfeld, does all of these commercials and makes so much money from them. So he's winning like a lifetime achievement award in advertising. And he gets up there and he goes, "I love advertising because I love lying." He's giving his acceptance speech, and he's like, "But what is it that we as consumers want?" he asks. And he says, hope. He's like, "Not even a lot of hope." He's like, "You just want hope that Bic pen that you buy, or that razor, or that juice, or that milk that you buy from the store because of the label or the ad is going to make you happy. And it won't. But you like to have that little moment between buying it and having it where you feel like you really did something." And that is what we do better as a country than any other country in the history of the world, creating that little moment where you believe and you have hope, even though it ultimately goes away. And that's what lures 150 million people to the continent. That's what gets people to cross an ocean to come here. Hope. Does it turn out as well as they thought? Probably not. It's what gets people to come to the border today to get turned away. Because if they can get across that border, they can have a tire shop going in Dallas where I can get my 4 tires done for a fraction of the price that I could here in Pittsburgh. And it'll be done pretty well.
See, Theo? Yeah. See, you're doing a good job, Theo.
Yeah. Seriously, like, Texas crushes it on tire shops and things like that. Like, absolutely the best. But you can, like, you have that hope, and that's what brings you here. And sometimes it pays off and sometimes it doesn't. But we as a country have built that into everything that we do. Like, every time we elect a president, if you're on the winning team, it's like they just elected the new Jesus, like he's going to have to be the one, Obama, Trump, maybe less so with Biden. I don't know that everybody was super excited about him. But
so I live in, like I said, San Antonio, right? And as I was listening to you, I was thinking, like, oh shit, obviously the Alamo is puro kayfabe, right? I mean, now they're coming out with, like, now all the real history, that everything that we were told was, not the way it went down, probably, and
that is really good marketing, man. That thing just sitting right there in San Antonio, like, blown up into this kind of great national bit of heroism.
Yeah. So I live,
it's good for your city's tourism.
Oh yeah. So I started thinking, like, as you were talking, was that, well, what it is, it's that like not a lot of people know this, right? And that was a little bit of what Eric Weinstein was saying in his piece. Like maybe not
That's
that
it.
it was an original thing, is that more people, if they knew this, could have it as a tool in their way that they would navigate life a little bit. And I started feeling this on the political side because I got into real active politics through the Ron Paul campaign, and then through Republican stuff, and I just remember every election cycle was like, just vote us in, we'll we won't raise the debt ceiling, and then you get into power and they raise the debt. Like at every level, I was like, okay, this is obviously like, they don't give a fuck. They're not trying to cut government or none of that bullshit. Like,
Right.
it took me
Right.
a bunch of like, so then I was like, okay, yeah, it is fake. It is,
That's it.
and so, but a lot of people don't, they really, I don't know, man. It's kind of hard
That's
I
a
get
great
it.
example of the kayfabe. Like, and that really was an interesting and a noble cause. I sympathize with the general idea. There are many things that could and should go, but no one once in power will, like, they'll just add their own stuff. We saw that with Reagan. Like, lots of people in that administration sincerely believed they wanted to shrink government. Like, David Stockman goes in there to run the Office of Management Budget. Like, he thinks that he's just going to slash all these programs, and then he learns that on the other side, Reagan's going to run all these deficits by cutting taxes. So it's like, fuck, can't even balance the budget, which is what my goal was. Like, you realize, like, institutionally, you realize this stuff, it's just not possible. And that's when the disillusionment sinks in. You're like, man. And when you get pulled into a movement initially, uh it's sad when like the wool is pulled off your eyes. And I always missed out on that because I had my dad was so cynical, and had already been through so many. And he's always like, man, this guy's just fucking selling you, but listen to him, he's pretty good. He did like Jesse Ventura though, but he's like, he's not going to get anything done. He didn't. He's like, go fuck him. And they did. Like, so just, it was sad to watch Jesse Ventura get disillusioned, because now he goes on like Bill Maher, and he's so burnt out, you
Yeah.
know, and so frustrated with the American government. And what else could the result be? Like,
So then so how, like, I guess at the top of the wrestling, there's the I don't know the infrastructure of how it works. So I'm sure you know of whoever writes the narratives,
yeah,
or whoever, so I don't know how that works, but if there's some parallels, is it natural for them to always be a class of people that says, maybe it's fake, but there's still the ones at top that are writing the narratives of really of how it's going to be played out? Because even if we're saying that it's fake, or like politics is a little bit fake, I know that they probably don't really like each other now. Something has probably
yeah,
changed. I mean, I know,
there's definitely rivalries. They're not buddies.
but then
But you're
so
right.
is it the corporate, or like who do you think is the one writing these narratives that come, and I know it's not a clean writing of a narrative, but you know um I didn't know this, but I guess that in that same kayfabe, that I guess in the early history of catch wrestling, it's people will get injured, and so instead of getting injured, they kind of figured out a way to, hey, let's stop getting injuring ourselves, and let's all win here. So there is
And
some
also
of
make
that
the
in
matches
politics,
less
right?
boring. Early catch wrestling matches, just like a typical folk style wrestling match today, would end up with a guy. Would end up very much like if high school folk style wrestling didn't have time limits, it would just end up with two men laying on each other on the ground, and it didn't have a referee standing them back up. And so the wrestling matches of like 1910, 1915 were two men laying on each other. Like when Stanislav Zabisco wrestles the Great Gama for the first time, that's supposed to be the world's greatest wrestling match. The Great Gama lays on top of Stanislav Zabisco but can't pin him for an hour. That's the whole match. And people watch that.
Have you ever
And
seen
so,
it?
like,
Have you ever
there's
seen
no
any of that
crowd
stuff?
appeal.
Have you ever seen any of
What's
that
that?
stuff? Have you ever seen
Yeah,
any
there's
of?
some old footage of this garbage on YouTube, and like, like those old Thomas Edison type film strips. It's burly men laying on each other. It's like the total opposite of what you would see in lucha Lucha Libre is like, let's give the audience everything they want, all of it. Midget wrestlers, high flying, blood, masks, colorful stuff, the craziest things you've ever seen every night. And then like that's like two old men laying on each other.
Yeah.
And that wasn't gonna, and you could get hurt too on top of it. Like you could get, if you get put into a particular hold, your shoulder could get wrenched out of joint. Now you could still you could still easily get hurt in pro wrestling, but it wouldn't be on purpose. Like it would be an accident during the match. So it was a wise decision. Like make the matches more dramatic, make them more competitive, make them more exciting, and like find ways to tease the results so that you could have, maybe you have 3 draws and then you finally have a winning match at the big event, when you have 10,000 seats, and you can do marketing and advertising much better. If you advertise something like that Great Gama Stanislav Zbyszko match is the greatest match in the world, and it's 2 guys laying on each other, everybody that goes to see it will be like, I don't want to watch that crap anymore. It's so boring. And that's what was happening. It was a popular sport, but as the wrestlers got better in the early 1900s, the sport kind of, without this kind of fixing, drifted toward its optimal state, which it would today. If we didn't have like an MMA today, stand up of the fighters, when they started MMA in 93, 94, here in the US, they didn't have like stand-up rules. So guys just laid on top of each other for unlimited amounts of time. Fans found that very boring. And so they had to add time limits and stand up. Like fighting will generally just be reduced to laying on someone unless you add some kind of rule. Like if you watch that's how it will end. Usually one guy will lay on the other, hold him, and wait unless somebody's got a gun, and we'll wait till the police come or something like that. That's what will happen. So it's not very exciting. So that there is a lot of that built into it. The idea, like the big company right now, like WWE has a writing staff that's large, and they work with the executives to produce the stories and determine who wins and who loses. Other companies like the big domestic rival AEW, which isn't nearly as big as WWE, but it's pretty well funded, they actually don't have a writing staff. The wrestlers work on creative. So the wrestlers do their own interviews and their own creative, working with some of the executives. They don't pick winners, but they do their own creative. That's the selling point. And the two big Mexican federations, same thing. The guys come up with their own storylines. Like if that guy's going to lose his mask or his hair to the 2 big types of matches down there, that's like negotiated like a nuclear arms treaty. And it involves the wrestlers, and like they do their own creative there too. WWE though is probably the most like a big government, like the American government, because it has the writing staff, it has the executives, and there's a lot of backstage politics. If you guys have buttered up writers and they suddenly get a good character and they get more screen time. And if you were really friendly with Vince McMahon when he was there, he would just elevate you right away because it was his company. So there was a lot of that kind of stuff there. And there's reflections and echoes of that in Washington, D.C. Now, the thing that's interesting with Washington, D.C. and any large government, and I'm sure that it's been talked about by lots of other people. I mean, my acquaintance Adrian Vermeil talks about it all the time. He's a professor at Harvard Law. The real people who run the American government behind all the kayfabe are the civil servants, the people that work in the departments and the bureaus and the agencies, and who are there regardless of who the president is and regardless of who the Congress is. Like my uncle was in the Foreign Service, so he was one of those types of people. Like he would go and he would be part, at the end when he died in Russia. He was part of the Russian the American embassy in Russia. And so, they would go there and they would shape the ambassador in particular, but they would shape our interactions with that government, really filter our policy. Stuff would come in from DC, but because they spoke the language and they were the professionals on the ground. This goes for every other department. Like if you try to tell the IRS to do something, it's still going to do it at its own pace, in its own way, and with its own workers. Like the growth of this administrative state, which is all these jobs that are technically tied to the executive, to the president, but they're just there. They're departments that under like Treasury, Department of Defense and so on, where the people are just there. They're very hard to get them. You can't just go in there and say, I'm going to fire all of you. You can't do that. You can't say, okay, from right now, we're going to start issuing this. We're going to start doing it this way. Because if they don't want to do it this way, they'll slow it down. Like if Trump comes in and says, like, well, I don't want you guys to start doing this, stop doing this particular type of thing. They could make that drag out over 28 weeks or 56 weeks. You know how government employees are. And they have a ton of this sort of like soft control behind the scenes. That also, in addition to the gridlock and the dislike among the elected politicians, there's this huge body of people, many of whom are kind of apolitical, but they're very interested in their job and they're very interested in growing the size of the thing they work in. Like if you're in charge of like some little chunk of the Department of State, where my uncle worked, or the Department of Commerce where he worked before that, you want to grow your budget area every year. That way you can hire extra people. That's your mark of your power. If I can get an extra, if I can get an extra specialist, or I can get an extra, translator, then I'm a more powerful departmental official. And that's the nature of a bureaucracy. And so behind everything, there is this bureaucracy, this managerial state that is, companies are like this. The big companies that like the one I worked in, CBRE, are like this too. They have this like fixed bureaucracy, and you could change out the CEO and you can change out some of the executives, but it will continue to run the same way. And it's kind of, and like, it'll like the CEO can say all kinds of different things and the president can say all kinds of different things. And so that's not even like he's faking. It's not even like he's faking the kayfabe. He's actually sincerely saying stuff, but it's only going to do what it's going to do. You know what I mean? Like if you say at the family dinner table, like, oh, all right, family, we're all going to just start going to church every Sunday, and the kids don't go. Now you've issued a new policy, but nobody's following it. Like you haven't changed anything. If you don't have that control over those people, and you can't because there's too many, you don't really have the power. And so like, that's the other thing about America. In addition to lots and lots of like saying one thing and having another happen, behind the scenes, there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and there's so many separate centers of power. It's hard to keep track of it. You couldn't keep track of it with a scorecard.
I remember in the class when you had brought up that legal case, right? Was it the Mulberry, or what was it? Or
Marbury v. Madison. Yeah.
And of course, I was chilling in the class, so I was having some drinks, so I don't remember everything, but I just remember when you were talking about that I was like, oh, that's the first battle when they were, where it was gonna start like real growth of, or there was just a battle between, was it like a bureaucratic, not a bureaucrat, there was,
I mean, there were bureaucratic appointments were at stake, and they were, because they weren't turned in on time. This one guy didn't get his job, and instead of giving him his job, the Supreme Court did what it would do as a bureaucracy. It enlarged its own power. It declared that it couldn't do the thing they were asking it to do, but that it was interpreting the Constitution to do so. And so by making that decision the way they did, they set the stage for, 300 years of growing judicial power. Pretty crazy. And that wasn't just a little bureaucratic battle. It was a bureaucratic battle over appointments to justice of the peace jobs in Washington, D.C. And that's how real government works. Like it makes sense that that's the case that establishes that amount of judicial power, because it's over such a small thing. But that's the fights that go on every day in Washington, D.C. Can I get an extra employee for this office? What office am I going to be in? Are you going to cut my, do we have to hire this guy? Are they going to, combine our offices? Are we going to go from cubicles to, like, all while we think the government is just kind of chucking along, and like, these are the battles being waged. Like, what should the air conditioner be set at? Like, these are real battles that friends of mine doing that. And like, these are people in charge of important things like student loan policy and other stuff like that. and they're battling over this. And they might even just hate each other outside of politics, just like they got to work together. It's pretty crazy, you know.
Yeah. So
All this is going on. So all of this is going on behind the scenes. So like that, this idea of kayfabe goes beyond just the real and the fake. There's the backstage and the front stage. There's just like in a wrestling match too. Like there's the locker rooms, and then there's what you
so
fans see.
so like I remember and hearing some of your interviews and some other podcasts. I did check out the two that you did with the good old boys, I guess
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
good, yeah. And um I remember a part in there where you had kind of mentioned that sometimes you'll like ghostwrite and you can write the different
Yes.
takes from
Yeah.
like whatever kind of side.
Yep.
So then I kind of thought like, okay, well then and now you're explaining some of you're putting into context a little bit of like why at a young age you were already told like how to see both well, I
Yep.
don't know if it's both sides but kind of like who's selling, who's buying,
Yeah.
who's and
Yep.
and so I bring that up to say like, so since I've started not paying attention to the political as much as I used to,
Good move.
I'm focusing more on myself and things that I'm
Yep.
more into and family and trying to do my own things. But um for someone that's in the mix of that, how does and I got out, I'm not saying I got out completely, but I'm not in it like I used to. uh do you have any tips for I don't know, or like advice for someone in my audience that might be on the like, hey, like pay attention, like, so I do pay attention at a real arm's length but not like how I used to, and I think I'm a better person for it, but also I can understand how somebody still has an attachment to being involved in that. But can you kind of give a take of how it's almost like you're about to tell everybody, hey, the Undertaker's not going to kill this Vato. I can write from both sides, So go ahead and tell everybody that the casket is not going to suffocate the people, or so. I'm trying to say, like, you.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, I'm trying to ask a little bit, right? Like,
I think it's the most important question on here. I think it's the most important question that anybody can do. You've already made a good decision, stepping back and finding, other things that occupy time. I know for me, family occupies all my free time. Like if I have free time and I'm upstairs, I'm playing with my daughter. Like tonight we were coloring, and that centers you. So that's really important. If like you have, or if you have friends or something like that. So number one, if you start getting worked up over things you see people post online, or you see people say, or you see politicians say, if you're getting fired up at the TV, you need to number one, step back into that. You need to take a deep breath. And if you can't do that, if you need something to stop you to do that first, what I recommend you do, and it's usually when somebody asks me to write like a piece of like cultural analysis or political analysis, like I have a month-to-month gig doing that for Unheard, which is sort of a center publication in the United Kingdom. And I'm on this beat where I'm just like in the dead center, and I analyze what Democrats and Republicans do. I don't care if they say, I'm in favor of this thing or in favor of that thing, because it's not going to happen. I talk about their performance. I talk about the implications of what they're saying. I talk about, and you want to start looking at politics that way. You want to step back and look at it from more of a distance. Look at it like you're observing, instead of running to the store and buying the product you love right off the shelf. Step back and think about what you're going to buy. Like compare the products. Don't get emotional. Like they want you to get emotional one way or the other. You'll fall. If you do, you'll end up in one of the two camps. And I mean, everybody that they say drifts into one of those camps, or not. And that's probably true to some extent. Although I think that's a little different. I think some people, if they step back from things, often will find themselves picking and choosing what, and they just won't like have a politician who does all the things they want. But I think the best thing you can do is to step back and take this in like it's a spectator sport. You could say, oh, we're all dying, everybody's dying, it's like a crisis. To listen to the TV news, every day's been a crisis since 9/11. You know, like everything that happens is some kind of crisis. And, my wife will get worked up about it sometimes. And she was pretty worked up about COVID and things like that in the early days. But we just, like, on top of everything else, it just runs on this kind of crisis and emotion. That's the best way to market to people. They make dumb decisions. They get really invested. They just consume hours of your content. They'll send you a donation. They'll do all these other things. Step back. Like, step back and evaluate this. Like, why is it being said? What are the positives and negatives? Another important thing, what can I ignore this completely? Because there might be some issues that you can literally say, I don't care how this comes out. They don't want you to think that. And you think, well, if you have an opinion on this marijuana stuff, you got a kid. I mean, pretty soon, if they legalize this weed, they'll be smoking crack. And like, I don't have an opinion on that. I mean, as a lawyer, I don't have an opinion on that. I'm going to go with the flow on that one. I don't smoke weed. Culturally, it's never been part of my experience. For some of my friends, it is. It is what it is. I don't, so that's one, like, and I see that issue, like, people are trying to like push that issue back into the center, or like trying to push that issue back into something we can argue about. And that's one where you could probably just go, well, I don't have a horse in this race. And there might be others that, like, even if they are important, like national issues, you can say, I don't have a horse in this race. People want me to give a big-ish opinion on Ukraine, Russia. I mean, I've been to Russia. My uncle died in Russia, worked in Russia, and I know the area better than a layperson, and I know it well enough to say it's really complicated. That whole situation is really complicated. Nothing I could say to you right now is gonna, you'll get fired up one way or the other. So there's issues like where you should just be able to say something like that. And whatever you do, you need to say and think what it takes to get that distance. Like, I mean, my dad used to say the best consumer in the world, the best customer of a car dealership, we had a Chrysler Plymouth Dodge dealership. Plymouth is gone as a brand, but Chrysler and Dodge are still around. If you have some like imbecile who comes in who only buys Dodge trucks, you're going to sell him a Dodge truck. Whereas the actual good consumer should look at a Ford truck, should look at a Dodge truck, should look at a Toyota, should compare rates, should see if there's any special offers, should see if there's anything they're trying to get off the lot, should see if there's a good used vehicle, should compare, all of these sorts of things, should play one dealership against another, especially if it's a tough time for the industry. Like at the beginning of COVID, we were able to get a great deal on a 2020 Honda CRV hybrid, like basically like two-thirds of the cost. If they thought that everything was going out of business, they called us up. And two-thirds of sticker for a new car. And then like a year later, couldn't get a new car. But that's because, we jumped on the deal because they said, you jump on that deal. But that's the type, I don't care about Honda. We've happened to have Honda for the past couple of years, but I don't care about Honda as a brand. I don't care about the fact that it's white. That's not my favorite color, but I don't care. It just happens to be the best thing. And like, that's how we should look at everything that we do as much as we can. That's one thing where like the economic libertarians kind of get it right, even if their language is kind of wonky. We should be trying to, if we can, rationally process a lot of these decisions that we're making emotionally. We should try to be more rational, careful consumers of everything, politics, TV, if a show doesn't make you happy, if it's dumb and it fires you up, don't watch it. Life's too short. If like listening to these politicians just angers you, why would you just want to go around angry? Some people want to go around angry all the time. And then the ultimate decision that you should make is what you made and what I've ended up doing, which is just, you spend more time in your family or your hobbies or, things that you're working on. And it's much better. It really is. I mean, even as a historian, my goal at the end of all the classes isn't to make you disillusioned in the U.S. or upset that it doesn't live up to its principles. No country does. Every country has problems. Historically, history is full of tragedy. It was a tough time. It's always been bad. Like people, like they feel like they learn one negative fact and they're just so blown away. They learn that one thing isn't what they thought it was. Like a little bit of the kayfabe breaks. Well, I got news for you. Everything's like that. Right? Like your whole life is going to be if you just go around looking for it, you're going to find it. But there's also just, there's just something to be said for being alive, where you're going around and you're living every day, and you're hanging out with your friends or your family, or even just yourself if you like playing video games or something, or you have all of those things are preferable to being mad online or being mad at the TV or being mad within your family, like these feuds that like will just fragment families over COVID and politics and stuff like that. If that's happening, everybody involved should take a step back. I just, I mean, I can't always protect it. I know that sometimes I've been duped by marketing, or even people that say, oh, I can resist all marketing, they're often susceptible to marketing. But we really should, since we live in a society that's just filled with marketing, we should step back and say, like, man, I try to step back from it and say, like, man, what do I really want? Not, more than that, what do I really need from life? Not even what I want. What do I really need? Because you probably find they're manufacturing all these wants and all this emotion, but you only need certain things. And the crazy thing is, like, if you've got like first generation grandparents, people that came over here like I did, and like you definitely do, like they have a much better grasp of the simple things in many cases. Like their idea was like, I want a farm in my grandparents' case, and they got one. Like that was the goal. They had a farm in Slovakia. They have a farm, or the family now has a farm here. That was the whole goal. And so there was not a whole lot of complexity there. He wanted, farm, wanted to read my cowboy novels.
Yeah,
and like
we just want papers, man. Hey, we're still trying to get our papers, man.
Yeah, that's still like a goal. Like that is a goal too. Then that has a political component, but that's a goal that, like, at the end of the day, you just want documentation, want a paycheck, want a little business or something, and like those are simpler goals. Like, do I want the U.S. to be a just society? I don't. It's never. I mean, it's never. No country is. So,
yeah. No, that's good.
I want to take care of mine, my people, and I want to take care of my friends, and I want to do right by the people I work with and stuff. Like that's about it.
Yeah. So
I've kind of had to take that whole journey just to get to there.
Yeah.
To get to that point where I'm that. But it is helpful. Like you mentioned, writing other pieces for other people. I've done a lot of that over the years. And if it's not writing it, I'm outlining it. And even being a lawyer has helped me see both sides, because you have to be prepared to argue either side, and they're going to be good points. And if you are just so fixed on arguing one side, or just can't see how it could be argued another way, you're going to struggle in life. You'll be unhappy all the time because you're not always going to get your way.
That's right. No. No, man, I want to be respectful of your time. Yeah, man. Thank you, Oliver, for coming on.
That's a big lesson there. I want people to take that to heart.
No. And I want people then to know that that's going to come out through your Substack, right? I mean, that's what you're saying, that you're putting out your
big part
in there. So
big part of it.
Can you please tell people where they can check that out, and where they can get all of your content, and how they can reach you if they wanted to try to reach you, whatever you got going on. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. You can check out my personal website, which has everything on it, links to everything, oliverbateman.com. My Substack is oliverbatemandoesthework.substack.com. I'm on Twitter as @MustacheClubUS. And you can contact me through any of those things. And my email's on all of them. So, if you ever have a question or anything, or just, heard something that's neat, want to hit me up. Because I do want people to actually get to that point where they're feeling a little more detached from all this and able to analyze it. It feels a lot better. So that's my big point, Carlos. Even my classes are designed to get people to that point. So I'm glad that the Ron Paul campaign helped disillusion you. Even if it wasn't fun.
Yeah,
I'm glad that he did. I'm glad Ron Paul did that for you.
No, man, I'm good, man. So yeah, like I said, thank you for coming on. I'd like to have you on again, because I still have some other questions on fitness stuff and different things. But maybe we'll hit them up on another time. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on, man. Peace.
It's fun. All right, Carlos. Good night.